So this table, I know this table got it. Did anyone else? I mean, you all got it. You're really good. So what was it? Cockroach trap. Well, the whole point of this exercise and the way they've set it up within the DVD is that it gets you to try and think about some of those objects that might be interesting on your site, that you can use to kind of intrigue visitors, to get them to think about it, to get them to ask questions, to get them to discover what it is. So it's, people love to do this normally.
Obviously, as we're thinking about the objects and meeting visitors, and we experienced here, you can have so many questions. Is there a suggestion they offer that at what point as the interpreter do you step in and let them, you could have people asking questions all day in the whole tour. When is it suggested that you go ahead and just tell them that what it is if they're not getting it?
My thought is you want to kind of feel the momentum of the group. Yeah. When it's tapering off, you stop it and tell them. You don't want to let it go on too long at all.
Yeah, but then they get frustrated and it's...
Yeah,
I don't want to.
Frustrated.
We're at the blooper table.
What?
Well, we're at the blooper table, we were a little slow.
Slow recognition.
Just tell them what it was. So things we talked about today that make sense to think about are what are some things that you say to visitors to try and elicit what their interests are? How do you determine what are those things that might be of interest on your site, locally, new things you're doing, making sure you know those, and then how do you identify maybe some objects that might be of interest and let them begin to figure them out. It's the same kind of thing we were doing on this morning when we were looking at the object and the composition and its uses. So those are all kind of tied in together. Now, one question would be, these things do work very well if you can do them. Why do they work so well? Well, in large part, if you remember when we had that first comment by Freeman Tilden, how you really need to relate what you're talking about to what the person already knows, or it's going to be sterile. That's kind of what you're doing here. That's why you're trying to get their interest. You want to make sure you can be able to make a connection. So why don't you... And there's been some really good recent research on personal connections and why they're very important. And so the personal connection and definition is that it relates to a person and it's the process of bringing ideas together, or it's a personal intimacy. So those are kind of the basic dictionary definitions of that. Jump to the next one. There's a really famous book, Presence and Past. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at that or read it, by Roy Rosenzweig and David Phelan. And in that, they talk about connections. Now, I think they surveyed maybe 1,400 people in the country to get their thoughts about history and about museums. And people feel connected with the past when they encounter real or true history, something that's authentic. When they feel transported back in time, immersed. They have objects, themes, or ideas that trigger memories. It's nostalgia, essentially. Or they have a social experience, family and friends. Now, some other research that was done by Gatewood and Catherine Cameron and John Gatewood. They looked at what they called numinous experiences, things that drew people to a site. And they were starting out doing their research around Gettysburg. And they defined numen in Latin as a beckoning from the gods. And what they found was that roughly 27%, and they did this study several different times, about 27% of people were coming to a site. Now, it could be a historic site, Gettysburg. It could be a place like the Lincoln Memorial in D.C., which nothing, in a sense, nothing happened there, but since the memorial has been built to honor Lincoln, there's much has happened there. So it's developed its own kind of gravitas. So that connection usually is some sort of deep engagement or empathy or even a spiritual communion people feel with the site. And some of you just, some of you must work at sites that must have some of that aspect of attraction. Luminosity.
Got everything else.
You got one?
We got everything else.
Well, because of the fact that it's known that like a quarter of people are coming to sites for that experience, to have that feeling, you can assume that a quarter of your audience is that way, and so it's something you can play on. It's an interest they're going to have. It's something to build upon. You can help them have that kind of communion, that deep empathy with the site and what's happening. All right, some other research, which is, this research has come from a man named Doug Knapp, who wrote a book called Applied Interpretation, which I think was published in 2007. It's maybe the most important book in interpretation to come out in a long time. And in that book, he looks at 30 plus longitudinal studies he's done, looking at how people have learned over time, and tries to find out what are the key factors within each of those experiences that lead to people remembering an experience and then finding meaning from it. He bases his whole theory of what memory is on a Canadian psychologist named Tolby, who says there's two kinds of memories. There's episodic. Episodic is what you're going to remember today from this experience, kind of the sights, the sounds, the smells, all those parts of an experience. And the other kind is semantic memory. That's more your conceptual knowledge. That's your understanding of something that fits into, this cockroach trap is very different from cockroach traps today. I mean, it's that comparison of information. It's real blurry, and the research that's been done is why the episodic bleeds into the semantic, but it does seem to happen. Some of your memories that are related to experiences move over into that semantic memory. So what he found, and that's the name of Applied Interpretation, putting research into practice, Doug Knapp. What he found that there were three main factors that appeared in the studies he did. These were studies done anywhere from like 3 months to 2 years after an experience. And I think in each case he'd been on the initial experience with the visitors. They were mostly at historic and cultural sites, many of them national park sites. Repetition of concepts in different contexts. That doesn't happen so much in museums because people aren't coming to you for that long for that to be effective, but that would occur sometimes. Active delivery method, hands-on, minds-on. Technique trumps verbiage every time. He talked about one case study where the woman, it was a program, I believe, and he said it was like the best organized, the best done program he'd ever seen. And when he talked to people later about it, all they remembered was there was a table up front where they could touch deer antlers. All that stuff about themes, all that structure was there. But they were very good. And the other thing is relevance to people, personal connection. And when he looked at after he looked at the data, he said if one finding from this book becomes apparent, the success Introverted Message has when it connects with the visitor's own life. It's that personal connection is the real key. He gives multiple examples of how that works. And you know yourself, if you go to a site and you don't have anything that connects you to it at all, well, you're not going to tell anybody about it. You're not going to be likely to go back again. So, if you can find those connections and help people out, let's go ahead and go to the next one. I'll include this article in the material I send out. But I did this piece for History News a couple of years ago called Personal Connections in the Great Cosmic Soup. And I interviewed leaders in the museum field around the country to find out, did they think personal connections exist? I should even step back from that. When I was working for the Institute for Learning Innovation, which is here in Edgewater now, it used to be in Annapolis, and I was doing some studies at Old Sturbridge Village and at Conner Prairie, I was finding people coming in when I would ask them, what are you here for? Why are you here today? There were a lot of people who explicitly said, I'm here to make a connection with my child. I'm here to make a connection with my grandchild. And I started thinking, wow, I was getting that as a direct answer. So then, as I did this article interviewing people in the field around the country to see, what do you think about it? Do personal connections exist? Yes. Everybody said, yes, they all do. And so then I talked to them about the different kinds that they saw. And these were kind of the ones that came up. The ones when people make like a mental connection, that's more intellectual. Nostalgia sort of fits into that, although nostalgia bleeds into the emotional, empathetic. Museum theater, storytelling, good first-person interpretation leads to that emotional kind of connection. Idea connections was a big one mentioned to me by Spear at Hancock Shaker Village, who said people come here because they really resonate with the idea of living a principled life, which was the Quakers' way of looking at life. So that idea itself connected them to the site. She also talked about actionable information. People were coming there because they wanted to find out ways that the Shakers grew crops, or the ways they built buildings. They wanted information they could get at the site and apply to their life today. Story connections. Stories really linked. Someone mentioned that earlier. The word humanist, homo narratus, is that what you said?
Narratives.
Yeah. Stories have been around forever, you know, from the first cavemen coming back from, you know, running away from a saber-toothed tiger, although I'm not sure they were there at the same time. But at any rate, the stories have been around for a long time, and we naturally tell stories. We're natural storytellers. So people make those kind of connections. People also make site connections. They come to your site, they have a good time with their family and friends, there's benches to sit on, they're comfortable, they like it. A lot of people I interviewed at Old Sturbridge Village in the fall, many of them were seniors, their school groups weren't coming anymore. I was finding them sitting around on benches, and I'd come to them and say, well, why are you here today? I like to come and sit. I like the space. So there's a lot of people just like the space, so that's more of a site connection. And social connections. When I talked to Jay Anderson, who's one of the leaders of living history in the field, and wrote a book long ago in the 80s called Time Machines, The World of Living History, Jay said people come to museums because they want to spend time with loved ones. It's a social thing, and that's really important. So any way you can begin to enhance any of these at all is going to make it more likely that the person is going to become connected to your site, that they're going to tell someone else about it. And not to be mercenary, but you have a much better chance of getting money from them, or resources, if they really like your site and if they've talked about it. So these are all, I think, are all worth thinking about. Next. So some ways to enhance them. You can tell stories. You can use museum theater. You can enhance the social connections. You can create emotional connections.